When you look beyond the superfluousness of a lot of the dating advice and coaches and rituals that some of these people online have to say, there gets to be a point in which you begin to understand that spiritually speaking, there's something deeper going on behind the phrase, she needs to feel safe with you. What's actually going on is that a woman's nervous system, if it is not compatible with your nervous system, she's not going to be ready for you, even if she wants to be. This is why BPD and narcissistic tendencies are at an all-time highs, because women's nervous system is completely fried. There are two parts of your nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system, and then there's the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight response. About 80% of the people operate in the society under the sympathetic nervous system response. Parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for digestion, calmness, and ability to be at rest with ease. Only about 20% of the population in society is operating under that type of nervous system. So, by definition, and by psychological analysis and literature, you can assume and deduce that many women and many people in general are not going to be ready for a true, long-lasting, long-term relationship. In fact, you'll see many people promise depth and emotional intimacy and all of these things, only to, when reciprocity is truly desired and needed for the relationship to thrive, that reciprocity is unable to be reciprocated. And what happens is that the entire relationship fizzles out. You see, love is something that is momentary. And I don't mean that as in it's temporary. What I mean is that it has to be chosen and embodied. Love is a choice to embody the principles of love in of itself. And you have to choose that moment by moment, each and every day, with each passing thought, with each passing action, with each effect of each cause that is on the timeline that you're existing on. Because cause and effect are really only real on timelines. Cause and effect don't exist in timelessness. And love comes from a place of timelessness. True love is timeless. And it's not necessarily something that is strictly romantic. However, there is something beautiful to be had in that romanticism. There's something beautiful to be had in that lack thereof. You might call it agape love. Agape love embodies the divine love and essence of all of existence. And that is on the universal or the multi-universal timeline, you might say. The issue is that many women are simply, maybe they're genuinely interested in you, but because their nervous system is so fried, they're operating from the sympathetic nervous system, it's going to be very challenging for them to actually want a true relationship that is everlasting and that is going to be long term. You see a lot of people will self-sabotage, and a lot of women will self-sabotage their own relationships because they need to feel that stimulation again. For many women nowadays, operating from the parasympathetic nervous system, from a place of calmness and peace, it's abnormal to them, to the point in which everything that is peaceful is considered to be turbulent to them. And so now they need and confuse turbulence with peace, because that's all that they know. That's why they have to go from man to man and relationship to relationship, is because they're constantly bombarded with this sense of being entitled. And I have yet to meet a woman that is everything that I need her to be, I don't think that it's even possible. And it's not the fault of the woman or the women for that. It is simply the case that it's exhausting to continually see woman after woman after woman claim to be something that she's not. And perhaps I have seen the most mischievous types of women out there. Perhaps I have seen the most deceitful types of women out there. But I genuinely don't know and don't think that women are capable of being authentic until a man who is his own sovereign man is able to lead them properly. I don't think that they really can. And it's, again, no fault of their own. It's just that that's just the way that they were made and they were designed. And it's very difficult for me to see how many women have essentially degraded themselves into this valueless existence. And they mistake high cost for high value. They do not understand the difference between value and cost. They just think about the cost of things, and well, if the cost of something, I mean, think about how superficial most of the women in existence today really are in the spirit of this time. Men, nobody really checks in on men to see if they are all right. And even when they do, it's not because they actually want to see if the men are okay. It's, well, is this man still got something to offer me or not? That's just the natural way in which the world works for men at that point. And women will never understand this. They can't, because they get their value differently. And it's not to say that this makes them less than, or it makes us less than as men. That's just what it is. And I genuinely think that the more sexist I become, and not in the sense of hating women, but just there are roles for men and there are roles for women, and to perceive that to be any other case is going to be disgraceful unto your own soul. And you're going to degrade your own soul by believing that women are capable of doing things that they're just not capable of. And men as well, doing things that they're just not capable of either. It is our, I don't want to call it a duty, because I don't think that it's a duty anymore. I used to believe, and again, I don't believe anything anymore. I don't need to believe anything. Something either is or it is not. And I used to believe that, well, if I consider it my sacred duty to uphold my own masculine principles, then I'll be okay. But now I don't see it as a duty. I think as soon as you make something to rejoice in a duty or a responsibility, it becomes grotesque unto you. It becomes disgusting. It becomes something that you don't necessarily understand, because you're training your nervous system to reject itself without even realizing it. If you rejoice in something, though, responsibility comes naturally. For example, if you rejoice in having a clean workspace or a clean environment or whatever the case may be, right, in your household, or you like to iron your shirts a certain way, or whatever the case is, right? If you rejoice in that, there's no longer a responsibility. There just is something to be enjoyed and to be rejoicing in. And this is something that many women just will not be able to understand I don't think that they're capable, again, of understanding it unless men get to the point in which they understand themselves. This is why women are drawn to the spirituality of a man and not the physicalness, even though it's not to say that the physicalness is not an inherent quality of the spirit per se, but it is really something to behold, to understand that your spirit holds the gravity, or perhaps a better term ought to be the density, to ensure that these pattern convergent signals within space-time are going to be optimized for your own understanding. Now, what do I mean by pattern convergent signals? Well, anybody that is familiar with the term synchronicity with Carl Jung is also under the understanding that synchronicities are meaningful experiences or meaningful coincidences in those experiences. And what I've associated these with in the Regal timeline theory is the pattern convergence signal. And so these pattern convergence signals are distributing certain information into your conscious field, and it's going to be up to you to discern what exactly those mean and how those mean, because what those really are is past timelines matching up with present or future timelines, and now you're making a choice, or there's trauma to be associated with, or to be disassociated with, or to be reconciled and healed. Because what is true repentance and healing? True repentance and healing comes to the same consequence and conclusion, really, on a timeline where there's a release or a letting go, or there is a sense of moving toward a more high value timeline and letting go of that low value, high cost timeline. Because you can move toward a high value, low cost timeline from a low value, low cost timeline. It just takes some reconciliation and some understanding and awareness. And you have to be conscious about these things. You have to be entirely intentional with these things. And when you are, you'll find that women become more interested in you when you are more assertive. In fact, I would even say hyper assertive, because for most men out there, they're not assertive. They don't know what it means to be assertive. And I'm not saying this as a critique. I'm saying this as a simple fact of the nature of the spirit of this time. And so one thing that you can start doing, that I did, for example, was something very, very specific. And it started when I started to lose weight 5 years ago, 6 years ago or so now. And I am 5'6", and I'm currently 155 pounds. I was at about 200 pounds so many years ago. And one of the ways in which I cultivated this sense of assertiveness was simply saying, I want, or I'd like more. Those two phrases really gave me that spark and reignited that spark, because for so long, and even now, there are times in which I can sense that if I'm around certain people, that people-pleasing energy wants to surface. It wants to arise in me. And I have to practice killing that timeline and moving off of that timeline every now and again. And this is something that many people don't want to admit is something that is going to be, especially if you're conditioned to do it so much. The way that I see it is that I became an alpha male with beta-like tendencies. And I don't like using those terms, but those are the best terms that we have to work with. They're the most generalized and most understandable for anybody. I could be more specific, and perhaps I will be more specific in the future, but for now, this will suffice. And so even with beta tendencies or characteristics, you can be an alpha male. And women just want the alpha. They want to know that you're capable. And there will be some women who are able to distinguish the difference between you being imperfect and them being entitled. Like they're going to be able to distinguish that. But some women, and most women in fact, because of their nervous system being so fried and they're operating from that sympathetic nervous system, they're going to expect the man to be anything and everything at all times. And when he's not, this justifies her ideological belief system, which again is not really healthy. I have not seen a belief system that ends well for anybody in my entire life. They don't get away with anything in a belief system. Nobody does. I've yet to see it. And so what I've noticed is that there's this proclivity that women will have if they're operating from the sympathetic nervous system response. And if they're too hyped up into their, or wound up rather, into their sympathetic nervous system, they're going to develop these BPD disorders, borderline personality, if anybody doesn't know. They're going to develop these narcissistic tendencies or histrionic tendencies, etc. And so one thing that we have to be mindful of as men is that we have to recognize that just because women like us, and maybe they even claim to be in love with us, they want to work, but they just can't bring themselves to hold themselves together because it's just too abnormal for them. There's probably just too much trauma, and there's probably just too much background for there to be any real truth emanating from that relationship. And that's where you have to make the decision to move on or to stay. But if you stay, you're probably going to sacrifice part of your soul to try to help heal hers, and there's no guarantee that you're going to do that. So in my estimation, it's better to be with a woman who is at least capable of change. If she's capable of change, she doesn't have to be perfect. Now, me personally, I'm not going to be with a woman with any tattoos or excessive piercings. I've tried to give these women the benefit of the doubt, and they've even shown excessive interest in me. And yet I've tried to give them the benefit of the doubt multiple times, and it's never worked out. And it hasn't been on me because I know that I'm good. I've aimed to be everything. I may not be perfect, but I can accept myself and I can love myself. And I do. I do have compassion for myself. I do love who I am. I do love what I do. I do love why I exist. I love myself and my life. I confess. I rejoice and love the humor of my life so much. My life is filled with humor. My life is filled with non-attachment, really, ironically speaking. But it seems as though most women just cannot bring themselves to get to that point. And so, psychologically speaking, they're just ungrounded. And there's nothing that we can do other than to provide that safe space. Because a woman needs that safe space in her nervous system. If her nervous system cannot relax around you, that's going to be the issue down the line. But not all of that is going to be on you. She might not be able to relax in her nervous system because it's not your leadership, it's because of her. Now, it could be because of your leadership. It depends on the situation, it depends on the person. This is a very individual process. This is a very individualized form of understanding the way the world works and the way that people work. So, with all that being said, I hope that this message was useful and insightful for you. Stay blessed and peace. Until next time.